Aisha never expected her day to start with humiliation. But sometimes, life surprises people in the most painful ways. Early morning, she walked into her school quietly, as she always did. Holding her books close to her chest, she was a shy girl. The kind who stayed in the background, unnoticed by most. Her father worked as a janitor in the same school. So she tried even harder to avoid attention because she didn't want anyone looking at her with pity or disrespect. Inside the teacher's staff room, a group of teachers were gathered around a table preparing for the school's annual talent day. They were discussing which students should perform this year. One teacher sighed and said they didn't have many talented students this time. Another laughed and said maybe they should let the janitor's daughter perform just to fill the stage. Everyone in the room chuckled at the joke, thinking it was harmless fun. They had no idea Aisha was just outside the door, cleaning up some spilled papers. She heard everything, every laugh, every whisper, every cruel word hidden under humor. Her heart sank. She stood frozen for a moment, and her eyes stung as she tried not to cry. She had always known people looked down on her because her father cleaned the floors in classrooms. But hearing it like this felt different. It hurt deeply. She felt small, unimportant, and embarrassed. She tried to take a quiet breath so no one would hear her. A moment later, one of the teachers walked out of the room and noticed her standing there, instead of showing kindness. The teacher smirked slightly and said they were just joking, but the tone made it clear that they didn't think she belonged on any stage. The teacher walked past her without waiting for a reply, leaving Aisha even more hurt. When Aisha finally gathered enough courage, she stepped into the room and softly asked if she could sign up for the talent day performance. The teachers exchanged amused looks. Some raised their eyebrows. Others whispered to each other as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. One of them said, trying not to laugh, "You want to perform? Are you sure?" Another teacher pretended to look surprised and said, "Well, we could use some entertainment." Their words were sweet on the surface, but the mockery underneath was sharp enough to cut her heart. Aisha nodded politely, even though her hands were trembling. She told them she wanted to play the violin. That made the teachers pause for a moment, but then came the laughter again. Some of them joked that she probably didn't even know how to hold a violin. Another said maybe she just wanted attention. And one teacher whispered loudly enough for her to hear that this will be the funniest part of the whole event. None of them believed she was serious. None of them respected the courage it took for her to stand there and ask. Still, despite their rude comments, Aisha kept her voice steady and repeated that she wanted to perform. Her eyes lowered, but her determination was strong. She remembered her mother's old violin at home. How she practiced late at night when no one was watching. How music made her feel alive and close to her mother again. That memory gave her strength. It made her stay firm, even as the teachers mocked her. Finally, the teachers agreed to put her name on the list. But not out of support, they did it because they thought it would be amusing to watch her struggle on stage. They signed her up with fake smiles and sarcastic encouragement. One of them even said, "This should be interesting," in a way that made the others laugh again. Aisha turned around slowly and left the room. Her heart felt heavy, but she did not cry this time. Instead, something inside her grew stronger. She walked down the hallway with small steps, but her mind was filled with a quiet fire. She knew the teachers had no idea what she was capable of. They didn't know about her late-night practice sessions or the music she carried in her soul. They didn't know she had a reason bigger than pride or attention. Her mother's dream lived inside her, and no amount of mockery was going to stop her from honoring that dream. As she reached the school courtyard, she whispered to herself that she would prove them wrong. She would walk onto that stage and let her music speak louder than their jokes. And maybe, just maybe, the same teachers who laughed today would be the ones who couldn't lift their heads in shame tomorrow. Aisha tightened her grip on her bag and walked forward with new determination. unaware that this one decision would change everything in her life. Aisha reached home that evening feeling tired in a way she had never felt before. It wasn't her body that was tired, it was her heart. She opened the small wooden door of their modest apartment and stepped inside quietly, hoping her father wouldn't notice anything was wrong. The apartment was tiny, with 2 small rooms, faded curtains, and furniture older than she was, but to her, it was home, filled with memories of her mother's laughter and music that still seemed to float in the air. Her father, Mr. Rahim, was sitting on a worn-out chair, resting after a long day of cleaning classrooms. He looked up and smiled the moment he saw her. His smile was the kind that made tiredness disappear for a moment. Even though his face showed years of struggle, Aisha tried to smile back. But he immediately sensed something was off. He had raised her alone since her mother passed away, and he could read her emotions like an open book. He asked her gently if everything was okay. Aisha hesitated before nodding. She didn't want to burden him with the cruelty she faced at school. But her father's eyes were kind and patient, and she finally told him a small part of the truth that some teachers didn't believe she could perform. She did not repeat the jokes or the disrespectful laughter. But her father understood more than she said. He reached out and held her hand, telling her softly that people often underestimate others because they fail to see their real value. His words soothed her heart a little. Aisha excused herself and went to her small room. The walls were covered with old posters of musical notes her mother once drew for her. On the corner table lay the precious violin, her mother's violin. Its wood was scratched and faded, but it held the memories of every lesson her mother ever taught her. Every warm smile, every encouraging word, every melody they played together before she passed away. Aisha picked up the violin gently, running her fingers across its surface. She remembered being 5 years old, sitting on her mother's lap as she guided her tiny hands along the strings. Music was their secret language, a bond carved in love and rhythm after her mother died. The violin became Aisha's comfort, her escape, her way of feeling connected to the woman she missed every day. She stood by the window and placed the violin under her chin. Closing her eyes, she began to play. The first note flowed softly, like a whispered memory. The room filled with the warm sound of her mother's teachings. Each stroke of the bow felt calmer, stronger, filled with emotions she couldn't say out loud. Her music told stories of loneliness, hope, and the dream her mother left behind for her. Unbeknownst to her, her father stood outside her door. Listening silently, his heart grew heavy with pride. He knew she was talented far beyond what anyone imagined. But he also knew the world could be unkind to people who came from humble backgrounds. He wished he could give her everything she needed: new strings, a better violin, a professional teacher, but he simply couldn't afford it. Still, he vowed silently that he would support her dream in every way he could. Later that night, while Aisha practiced, she thought about the talent show again. The teacher's laughter echoed in her mind. But instead of breaking her spirit, it pushed her harder. She spent hours repeating a single melody until every note felt perfect. Her fingers ached, her shoulders stiffened. But she didn't stop. Each sound was a promise to herself, a promise to her mother, and a promise to the people who doubted her she would not let them define her. She practiced until her bow felt too light and her vision blurred from exhaustion. When she finally paused, she looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror across the room. She saw a girl who wasn't weak or insignificant, but someone who carried strength in her silence and power in her music. She smiled softly at herself. Realizing she wasn't playing to impress the teachers, she was playing to prove to herself that she belonged on that stage. When Aisha finally lay down to sleep, she kept the violin close, almost as if holding on to a piece of her mother. Her heart still hurt from what happened earlier, but now it hurt less, replaced by determination. She whispered to herself that she would not let anyone turn her mother's gift into a joke. She would practice every day. She would push herself harder. And when the day of the event arrived, she would stand confidently on that stage and play her heart out. She didn't know what the future would bring. But she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer scared of being laughed at. She was ready to be heard, and soon, very soon, the whole school would learn who she truly was. The days leading up to the talent show moved slowly for Aisha. Each morning she walked into school with her violin case held tightly in her hands, hoping no one would notice her. But schools are small worlds where news spreads fast. And soon, almost everyone knew the janitor's daughter had signed up to perform. Some students became curious, but many others turned it into a joke they could laugh about during break time. Whenever she walked by a group of students, she could hear whispers floating behind her. Some girls giggled and said she was just trying to impress everyone. A few boys teased her father's job loudly whenever she passed to make sure she heard them. And some students simply stared, as if waiting to see when she would embarrass herself. Aisha kept her head down and walked silently, reminding herself that the stage would reveal the truth. Not the hallway. The teachers weren't much better. During staff meetings, a few of them made sarcastic comments about the performance list. One teacher murmured that they hoped she wouldn't scratch the violin like a beginner. Another joked that the audience needed some comic relief. And although not all the teachers joined in the mockery, none of them stopped it either. They assumed she was just a child trying too hard, without skill, without guidance, without a chance to shine. But what no one knew was that every lunch break, Aisha disappeared quietly into a small, forgotten storage room at the end of an old hallway. The room smelled of old paint and dust, broken desks and unused books piled against the walls. But it had something she needed: privacy, peace, and the perfect quiet to practice. She would close the door gently behind her, open her violin case, and enter her own world where no one mocked her and no one laughed. In that small room, her hands moved confidently. Her bow danced across the strings, her fingers glided with ease, and the dusty air filled with beautiful music that didn't match the girl the teachers thought they knew. She practiced new melodies, refined the old ones, and repeated the difficult parts again and again until her fingers felt sore. Every note she played carried her mother's voice in it, reminding her she was capable, talented, and stronger than the words that tried to break her. One afternoon, while Aisha was practicing the opening notes of her performance piece, someone was passing by: Ms. Samreen, a young English teacher known for her kindness, paused when she heard the sound coming from the storage room. At first, she thought it was a recording. The music was too smooth, too emotional, too powerful to be coming from an empty old room. Curiosity pulled her toward the door. She slowly pushed it slightly open, just enough to see inside without disturbing the player. Inside, she saw Aisha, head slightly bowed, eyes closed. Completely lost in the melody, Ms. Samreen's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen such raw talent in a student before, especially one so overlooked and underestimated. She immediately understood that Aisha wasn't just playing the violin, she was speaking through it, telling stories that words could never express. When Aisha finally stopped, unaware she had an audience, Ms. Samreen gently stepped back and walked away. Giving the girl privacy, she didn't want to embarrass her, and she didn't want anyone else to discover her secret practice place. For the rest of the day, Ms. Samreen couldn't stop thinking about what she heard. She wanted to encourage Aisha, tell her she was amazing, offer her guidance. But she also sensed that Aisha wasn't ready to be noticed yet. She understood the girl wanted her performance to speak for itself, so she chose to stay silent, trusting Aisha's strength and waiting for the right moment to support her. Meanwhile, Aisha didn't know anyone had heard her. She simply returned home each evening, exhausted but satisfied. Her fingers sometimes shook from so much practice, but she didn't care. She was preparing not just a performance, but a message for everyone who doubted her. Every mocking laugh pushed her harder. Every unkind word added fuel to her determination. The night before the event, she sat with her violin on her lap, adjusting the strings and cleaning it carefully. Her father watched her with gentle eyes. He didn't know how talented she truly was. But he knew her heart. He knew she poured her soul into every note. And even if the world laughed, he would still be proud of her. He gently placed his hand on her head and told her that her mother would have been proud too. Those words filled her with new courage, like warm lights spreading in a cold room. As she lay down to sleep, she imagined the stage, the bright lights, the crowd, and the teachers waiting for her to fail. But instead of fear, she felt a quiet strength growing inside her. She whispered to herself that tomorrow would not be the day she got mocked, it would be the day she surprised them all. The day her music would rise above every whisper, every joke, every doubt. And she drifted into sleep with determination stronger than ever. The day of the talent show finally arrived, and the entire school buzzed with excitement. Students rushed through the hallways, carrying costumes, props, and makeup kits. Teachers checked their clipboards as if they were preparing for a big festival. Laughter, chatter, and footsteps echoed everywhere. But in the middle of all that noise, Aisha walked in quietly with her violin case held close to her chest. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she had carried inside her for weeks. She wore a simple, neatly ironed outfit, nothing fancy. Just clean clothes her father had washed the night before. Her hair was tied back into a small braid. The simplicity of her appearance made some students stare. A few even whispered to each other and tried to hide their giggles. Aisha pretended not to notice. She had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. She kept walking forward with small but steady steps, reminding herself why she was here. Inside the auditorium, chairs were arranged in neat rows. The stage lights were warm and bright, casting a glow on the long red curtains. The sound technicians tested the speakers, and the principal checked the schedule one last time. Parents slowly filled the seats, chatting about which student would perform first. Some teachers walked around proudly with their best performing students, giving them last-minute encouragement and advice. In one corner backstage, Aisha stood alone. Holding her mother's violin, she could feel her hands trembling. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting her mother's memory comfort her. Her mother always told her that true courage wasn't about having no fear. It was about facing fear while holding on to something bigger than fear itself. Aisha opened her eyes and looked around, reminding herself that this stage was not her enemy. It was her chance. A group of teachers stood nearby, whispering quietly as they looked at her. One of them smirked and said she hoped the violin strings wouldn't snap in the middle of the performance. Another joked that the audience needed something to laugh about. A small ripple of laughter followed. Aisha heard every word. But instead of letting the comments weaken her, she let them strengthen her resolve. Their laughter became fuel inside her chest, making her heart burn brighter. The show began with cheerful performances. A group of students danced energetically, receiving loud applause from the audience. A young boy sang a pop song that made the crowd cheer. A group of girls performed a small drama that brought laughter and smiles. Backstage, performers came running in and out, excited and happy, but Aisha remained in her quiet corner, waiting patiently for her turn, repeating the melody in her mind. As her name got closer on the list, her heart began beating faster. The principal stood near the backstage curtain, calling out names loudly when he finally reached Aisha's name. He paused for a moment, surprised. As if he had forgotten she signed up, he read her name again slowly, like it felt strange to see it on the performance list. A few teachers exchanged smirks, already expecting a disaster. Aisha stepped forward when her name was called. Holding her violin tightly, she walked onto the stage slowly. The bright lights blinding her for a second, the audience fell into a low murmur of curiosity. Some students in the front rows leaned forward, wondering what she would do. Others sat back with amused expressions, assuming she would fail. A few teachers watched with folded arms, ready to shake their heads in disappointment. Aisha stood in the center of the stage, her small figure surrounded by light. Her hands trembled again. But she straightened her shoulders and lifted the violin. The hall felt silent, almost too silent. She could hear her own breathing. She remembered her mother's warm hands guiding hers, teaching her how to steady the bow. She remembered her father's tired smile as he wished her good luck that morning. And suddenly, her fear melted into determination. She placed the violin under her chin, closed her eyes, and inhaled slowly. The hall grew even quieter. She heard someone whisper mockingly from the front row, but she ignored it. Her fingers found their position on the strings. Her bow hovered above the violin. She held her breath for one last moment, letting her heart settle, letting her thoughts clear, and then, just as she was about to begin, she felt something shift inside her, not fear, not doubt, but a powerful calm, a calm she had never felt before. She wasn't just going to play the violin, she was going to speak through it. She was going to show them the truth they refused to see. Aisha opened her eyes, looked straight into the blinding lights, and prepared to release the first note that would change everything. The moment Aisha drew the bow across the strings, the first note floated into the air like a soft breath of wind. It was gentle at first, trembling slightly. But then it grew steadier, warmer, richer. The sound filled the silent auditorium, carrying something pure and powerful that no one expected. The murmurs in the crowd stopped instantly. The giggles died. The amused expressions on teachers' faces slowly froze. Aisha's music had taken control of the room within seconds. She kept her eyes closed, letting herself disappear into the melody. The stage lights felt distant, the audience felt invisible, and the only thing she focused on was the memory of her mother's voice guiding her fingers. Each movement of her bow painted a story. Each note carried emotion she had never spoken aloud. Her music wasn't just a performance, it was her heart speaking. Her pain, her hope, her love, everything she had held inside for so long. People in the audience leaned forward without realizing it. The sound was unlike anything they had heard from a student her age. Some thought it must be a recording, but the bow in her hand moved too smoothly, too naturally, too delicately for it to be fake. Her fingers danced across the strings with a confidence that astonished everyone. Students who had laughed earlier now stared with wide eyes, unable to blink. The teachers who once whispered sarcastic comments began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Their smug expressions faded completely, replaced by confusion, then surprise, and slowly, shame. One teacher who had made the loudest joke earlier felt her throat tighten as she listened to the melody. It was impossible to connect the girl on stage with the child they had mocked for days. This wasn't just talent, this was mastery. The kind of gift musicians trained for years to achieve. Aisha's father stood near the side entrance of the hall. Hidden from most of the audience, he had come straight from work, still wearing his janitor uniform. His hands were rough, tired, stained with cleaning chemicals. But they trembled slightly as he listened to his daughter. He didn't know she could play like this. He always knew she was good, but this was something else entirely. He felt tears sting his eyes. But he blinked them away so he could keep watching her shine. The melody shifted into a deeper, more emotional tone. Aisha remembered her mother's last night with her. Remembered how she held her tiny hands and whispered that the violin would become her voice. As the memories rose, her playing grew more intense. Every note carried love, loss, strength, and longing. The audience felt it. Even if they didn't know her story, the music wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Heavy with emotion, impossible to ignore, some students closed their eyes to listen better. Some parents put their hands over their hearts. One little boy whispered to his mother that the music felt like magic. In the back row, a teacher who rarely showed emotion wiped her eyes quietly. Embarrassed to be crying, but unable to stop, Aisha opened her eyes only for a moment. She saw the blurry shapes of people staring at her. Not with mockery, but with awe. It felt unreal. But she didn't let the surprise break her rhythm. She kept playing, letting her bow move as if the violin were breathing with her. She felt strong in a way she had never felt before. The girl who walked through hallways unnoticed was now the center of everyone's attention, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. The final part of her melody rose like a wave, powerful and emotional. She poured every drop of her heart into those last notes. Every bit of hurt she had swallowed at school. Every moment of loneliness, every encouraging word from her father. Every memory of her mother's gentle smile, she let it all go into the music. The hall felt frozen in time, as if the world outside had stopped moving just to listen. Then, slowly, she lowered her bow, letting the final trembling note fade into complete silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. The silence was so thick, it felt like the room itself was trying to understand what had just happened. Aisha stood still, her chest rising and falling, unsure of what she was supposed to feel next. And then, a single clap broke the silence. It came from the back, followed by another and another. And suddenly, the entire hall erupted into applause. Loud, echoing, unstoppable applause. Some people stood up without thinking. Others clapped with tears on their cheeks. The applause grew so powerful that Aisha felt her knees weaken. She had expected mockery. But instead, she received the loudest appreciation of her life. She blinked, trying to hold back the tears forming in her eyes. For the first time, she felt truly seen, truly heard, truly respected. The music she had kept hidden in dusty rooms had finally reached the world and changed everything. The applause didn't stop. It rolled across the hall like a wave, growing louder and louder. Students, parents, and even teachers stood on their feet, clapping with wide eyes and open mouths. Aisha stood frozen on the stage, violin still in her hands. She wasn't sure if she was dreaming. It felt like a dream, the kind so beautiful. You don't want to wake up from it. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to breathe through the storm of emotions inside her. Then, slowly, she gave a small bow. The crowd clapped even louder. Someone from the audience whistled in joy. Another shouted bravo, and for the first time in her life, Aisha felt what it was like to be celebrated, not for what people thought she was, but for what she truly was, behind the curtain. Students who had once laughed at her now whispered in disbelief. A few looked embarrassed. Some teachers still stood with their arms crossed. But their expressions had changed. The mocking glint in their eyes was gone, replaced by something else: regret, guilt, and silent shame. Ms. Samreen, a young English teacher who had once listened secretly to Aisha's lunchtime practice, wiped her eyes quietly. She had believed in the girl. But even she hadn't expected the performance to be this powerful. She clapped with both hands, her heart full of pride, hoping Aisha knew someone had always been cheering for her. Even if silently, Aisha walked off the stage slowly. Each step felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted off her shoulders. The spotlight faded behind her, but the applause still echoed in her ears as she stepped backstage. A few students stepped aside to let her pass. They didn't laugh, they didn't whisper. They looked at her with wide eyes and quiet respect, like they were seeing her for the first time. Her father stood near the door, his eyes red, tears on his cheeks. He didn't care who saw him crying. He opened his arms wide, and Aisha ran into them, hugging him tightly. He whispered in her ear, "Your mother would be so proud." And Aisha smiled through her tears, holding on to him like she never wanted to let go. Word spread fast through the school. Teachers who had made jokes earlier tried to hide their embarrassment. Some came up to Aisha and offered soft compliments, saying things like, "You have a rare gift," or "We didn't know you could play like that." She nodded politely, but she remembered every word they had spoken before the smirks. The laughter, the disbelief. She didn't need their approval now, because the truth had already been heard later that day. The principal called Aisha to his office. She walked in quietly, unsure of why she had been called. To her surprise, the principal stood up and clapped again, all alone. He told her she had delivered one of the most beautiful performances the school had ever seen. He admitted, without saying too much, that many, including himself, had underestimated her, and that they had been wrong. He then handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation and a scholarship offer from a local music academy. A music instructor from the audience had been so impressed that he wanted to train her personally. Aisha stared at the paper, unable to speak. This was more than she had ever dreamed of. She looked at her father, who stood beside her with his hands folded, speechless with joy, outside the office. Students began treating her differently. Some smiled shyly. Others tried to talk to her between classes. Even the ones who had made fun of her now looked nervous when she walked by. They whispered to each other, not out of mockery anymore, but out of amazement. She had become someone unforgettable. Not just the janitor's daughter, but Aisha, the girl who made a violin sing like magic. As the day came to an end, Aisha sat alone on a bench near the school garden. Violin on her lap, she watched the orange sky slowly turn to pink. Her heart was full not of pride, but of peace. The applause had ended. The stage lights had dimmed. But something new had begun inside her. For the first time, she truly believed in herself. Not because others now respected her, but because she had earned it through her courage, her pain, and her music. She closed her eyes and began to hum the melody she had played earlier. Soft and slow, and even though no one was watching now, her soul still danced with every note, because music had always been more than sound. For her it was her story, her strength, and the way she finally found her voice. The next morning, something felt different when Aisha walked into the school gate. The air felt lighter. The walls seemed brighter. For the first time, people didn't look through her, they looked at her. A few younger students smiled as she passed. Some older ones stepped aside respectfully. A girl from the senior class even whispered, "That's her," to a friend, and Aisha heard it clearly, but it didn't make her nervous this time. It made her smile gently. She had become someone they noticed not because of her father's job, but because of her gift. She walked slowly through the hallways, carrying her violin case just as she had every day before. But this time, no one laughed, no one whispered behind her back. Instead, the sound of silence was filled with something near respect. It felt strange but beautiful, like stepping into a story that was suddenly going right. When she reached her classroom, her classmates paused for a second. Some gave her small nods, a few clapped softly, and one brave boy even said, "You were amazing yesterday." Aisha nodded politely, her heart full. She wasn't used to attention, and she didn't need loud praise. Just being seen, truly seen, was more than enough. During lunch break, she sat alone under her favorite tree, like she always did. She liked the quiet, the way the wind moved the leaves, and how the shadows danced on her notebook. She had just started drawing tiny music notes on the corner of a page when she heard footsteps. She looked up and saw Ms. Samreen walking toward her with a kind smile on her face. The teacher sat beside her and gently placed a small wrapped package on Aisha's lap. Aisha looked at it, surprised. "What's this?" she asked softly. Ms. Samreen smiled again and said, "Just something I thought you deserved." Aisha opened it carefully and found a brand new set of violin strings, better than anything she had ever owned. Her eyes widened in shock, and her hands trembled slightly as she held them. "I heard you during lunch breaks," Ms. Samarine admitted. "I didn't want to interrupt your world, but I always knew the world needed to hear it." Aisha felt her eyes sting. But she blinked quickly to hold back tears. No teacher had ever said something like that to her before. She whispered a thank you. But her voice cracked with emotion. Ms. Samarine simply nodded and added, "I hope this is just the beginning for you." Later that day, something even more surprising happened. The same teachers who had laughed at her behind closed doors now called her to the staff room. She entered quietly, unsure of what to expect. The room that once echoed with sarcasm now felt oddly silent. The teachers stood awkwardly, some avoiding eye contact. The senior teacher, who had first joked about her joining the event, cleared her throat and finally spoke. "I want to say sorry," she said, her voice low but clear. "We misjudged you." And that was wrong. Other teachers nodded slowly. A few mumbled apologies. Aisha looked around the room and realized that something big had happened, not just for her, but for them. She had changed their minds. Not by shouting, not by arguing, but by showing them who she really was, through music, through truth. Through grace, she nodded respectfully. "Thank you," was all she said. She didn't need more. Their regrets spoke louder than any words they could offer, and in that quiet moment, the power of kindness and talent had finally defeated the weight of prejudice by the time the final bell rang. Aisha had become more than just a student. She had become a name people would remember. Not as a girl from a poor family or a janitor's daughter, but as an artist, a performer, a voice of quiet courage as she walked home with her father. The violin case in one hand and the new strings in the other, she felt the sun warm her face, and for once, the world didn't feel like a place she had to hide from her. Father glanced at her and asked gently, "How was your day?" Aisha looked at him and smiled. "Better than I ever imagined," she replied, and deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. The world had finally heard her music, and now it would never forget her name months. Passed since the day Aisha stunned everyone with her violin. But the echo of that one performance never truly faded. It became a moment that people talked about again and again, school, at home, even in local cafes where parents gathered. People didn't just remember the music, they remembered how it felt. They remembered how a quiet girl from a poor background had stepped onto a stage and turned silence into thunder. Doubt into Aisha continued to walk the school halls with the same quiet steps. But now those steps were followed by eyes filled with admiration. Not pity, teachers nodded at her with real smiles. Not sarcastic ones. Students waved at her, even ones who used to avoid her. But Aisha hadn't changed. She was still humble, still soft-spoken, still carried her violin case like it was a treasure chest holding her mother's memory, her father. Mr. Rahim carried himself differently now too. He still cleaned the classrooms, still mopped the floors, but the way people greeted him had changed. No longer just the janitor. Now he was Aisha's father. And there was pride in that title. Teachers who once passed him without a glance now stopped to say hello, to thank him, to ask how Aisha was doing. His tired face still showed the marks of long days. But now it also carried a light one born from pride and joy. The local music academy where Aisha had earned a scholarship became her second home. She went there after school, often practicing until the sun went down. Her new teacher, a kind but strict man named Sir Hamid, immediately saw the rare spark in her playing. He pushed her gently, helping her refine her skills, showing her things even her mother hadn't had time to teach. Aisha soaked it all in like rain after drought. She wanted to honor her gift. To honor her mother's dream at one community concert, Aisha performed alongside other students from the academy. The audience was full of strangers this time, no classmates, no teachers, no familiar faces, but when she began to play, the same thing happened again. Silence, then wonder, then tears, then thunderous applause. She wasn't just a school talent anymore. She was becoming something more, something real one day. A music journalist came to visit the academy, curious about a student whose name had started to spread across small local newspapers and online forums. He watched Aisha perform and was left speechless. Later, he wrote an article titled "The Girl Who Played Truth Through Strings." And it went viral. People from other cities began to learn her name. Messages of support flooded in, some from students, some from musicians, even a few from abroad, offering her encouragement and even small donations to help her continue her journey. But Aisha didn't let the attention change her. She still practiced alone in her small room, still cleaned her violin carefully each night, still whispered to her mother's memory before every performance. Her world had grown bigger. But her heart stayed grounded back at school. A new event was being planned, a charity performance to raise funds for underprivileged students. And this time, the principal asked Aisha to be the headline performer. Not as a favor, but with genuine pride. She accepted with a quiet nod, and the entire school buzzed with excitement. No one dared joke this time. No one doubted her. All waited eagerly to hear her play once more when the day came. Aisha walked onto the same stage where it all began. But now, it wasn't just a stage. It was a place of transformation, of truth, of triumph. She stood taller, her fingers more confident, and when she played, it was no longer just a song. It was a message to every child who had been overlooked, underestimated, or laughed at. Her music said, "You are more than their judgment. You are enough." After the performance, a younger girl approached her shyly and said, "I want to play the violin like you someday." Aisha knelt down, smiled, and said, "You can, just never stop believing in yourself, no matter what others say." And in that moment, Aisha knew her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who dared to rise above them. Girl who had once been a quiet shadow in the background had become a symbol of hope, courage, and grace. Not because she shouted louder than others, but because she let her heart speak through her music. And now her melody played on, not just in concert halls or news articles, but in the hearts of those who needed it most.